Boy, oh boy, I can't wait to hear from my favorite media understander, Steven Crowder, about the new Animal Farm remake coming to theaters sometime near you, maybe, thanks to Seth Rogen. There's my sponsored spot. Do I get my paycheck now? I was told that George Soros is handing out paychecks. Please? Editor, can you roll the intro so that I'm not just stuck here embarrassed? Like, I could literally sit on this scene forever, and I just want to leave. You could cut. You could cut at any time. How's it going, everybody? My name is Suris, and if you're not familiar with me, I try to be a little even-handed when it comes to politics, and I try to make politics less miserable to listen to and deal with. So if those are things that you value, then please consider subscribing to my channel and maybe telling a few friends what I'm doing over here. I also really like supporting the artists in my community, and sometimes they come up with weird things like this right here. This is an edit from Pacifrisk. They said they made this with the first MTG card maker that they found, and they said they tried their hardest thinking of what the card would actually do. So they've got it mostly right. Simic colors, I mean, I am a Sultai player in Magic, mostly, so this is close enough. Vigilance, protection from red, white, and blue. I'm protected from myself, I guess. When Suris, Slayer of Bad Politics enters play, tap all red creatures on the field. They don't untap during their opponent's next untap step. That is a very classic Magic the Gathering style ability. Very weak to today's standards. Pretty much right up my alley. Pacifist, thank you very much for submitting your fan art. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop it into the fan art section of the Discord. That said, let's get right to, as I said, my favorite media understander, Steven Crowder, and he's got words to say about Animal Farm. Let's go.
Well, Animal Farm, which is, of course, if you know Orwell, a famous piece of writing. But
you're right. George Orwell, famous author who, like Martin Luther King, is basically quoted all the time by conservatives very, very selectively, irrespective of whether or not he would agree with their positions. Anyway, continue, Stevie.
Today, before that, young Americans, 18 to 29, they're becoming far more warm-hearted towards socialism, negative on capitalism. So a positivity toward the idea of capitalism as a system, only 50%. Socialism, 62%. Communism, 32%.
Well, that's strange.
And it's all
right, so real quick, we should probably talk about what each of those terms means before Steven Crowder tries to poison the well on those. So what is communism? Well, it's a classless, stateless, moneyless society. Now, there are plenty of authoritarian regimes that have tried to claim the label of communist, but much like if Bernie Sanders happened to, I don't know, take over the United States right now and be president, we would not suddenly become a socialist nation, despite the fact that we had a democratic socialist leader. So remember, we do have ways to define these terms. A socialist, on the other hand, is not the same thing as a communist. A socialist is somebody that believes the proletariat, that is, the working class, should own the means of production. Effectively, they do not believe that there should be a person in charge of capital. There should be democratic ownership of, well, factories and of restaurants and of the workforce in general. The idea is that if democracy is so lauded and so powerful, then we should bring it into the workplace, much like it already operates within our governments. And then, of course, a capitalist, capitalism as a system, is the system where a privateer, a private entity, can own capital and use that capital to build businesses, build wealth, enrich themselves, and generally create businesses and extract wealth from those businesses. Whereas in socialism, those businesses would have their wealth trickling through the actual rank and file of the workers. A capitalist is free to let the labor markets decide how much they're allowed to take from their workers. There's more nuance to each of these descriptions. If you want to get into them, you can, but I figured I'd throw that out there for anybody who might need to know what those words mean, despite the fact that we throw them around all the time in common parlance. Anyway, continue, Stevie.
always those who haven't lived it. Ask Cuban migrants what they think. Ask people who fled the USSR. Ask them what they think. So this brings us to Animal Farm.
Okay, but before we get to that, I do need to say, you're right. people who have left regimes that call themselves communist. So China, who is famously led by the Communist Party, the USSR, which was headed by the Marxist-Leninist revolution. There are reasons that these regimes were awful. The thing with communism is it is generally considered a utopian and maybe even unobtainable style of society. Were any of these societies communist? In the strictest sense, probably not, but in a broad sense, they could be considered a flavor of communism. And much like how capitalism is not in and of itself inherently evil, it is a system and therefore lacks the capacity, it is what the system tries to promote that you need to critique. So when we're talking about capitalism, if everything is profit for profit's sake, which is generally what unregulated capitalism leads to, you tend to get things like roads that people can't cross without paying tolls all the time everywhere because they are all privately owned. You get things like hospitals that nobody can afford because they are all privately owned. You get things like fire departments that will not come and help you unless you have been paying for their fucking subscription service. All things, by the way, that we have done at various stages in the United States. I know people who have fled the United States to go to Germany, to go to Canada, to go to New Zealand, that have left here to go to places that are far more socialistic than we are. Now, granted, the economic system in each of these other countries is still capitalism, but capitalism does not exist in its own bubble with socialism in its own bubble. You can have socialistic tendencies within capitalism, and you can have those capitalistic tendencies working many times against labor, but working within the same system, where we socialize as many things as we can within our system to make sure that people are able to function, all while private capital tries to crush us. And hell, if you want an example of capitalists actually using this to their advantage, did you know that when Walmart is unable to pay its employees enough money, despite making $16 billion in profit, their employees tend to have to be subsidized by the United States government. They have to be on welfare programs. They have to be on food stamp programs. They have to be on government assistance for healthcare. All things that are subsidized by the government and by tax dollars. This is Walmart socializing its losses, the amount of money that they claim they cannot pay their workers. And when the government needs to bail a company out, that is also a socialization of their losses, but they will privatize all of their wins and all of their gains. So, I mean, if you want to talk about socialism and welfare queens and all that fun shit, welfare queens are actually the people who own big businesses that are, quote, too big to fail. But the fact of the matter is, if Steven Crowder is going to give an example of people fleeing other nations to come here, I want to also give an example of people fleeing the United States to leave elsewhere. It happens both ways.
A piece of literature that was rabidly anti-authoritarian, socialist, communist, versus the film that's being made now, and this is how we find ourselves to be the frog in the boiling water. Constant propaganda. It's time for Then and Now.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but Steven, you're not exactly correct about that. I know that you want to say that you are the George Orwell understander, but remember, the USSR and communism are not necessarily the same thing. In fact, actually, when the Marxist-Leninist philosophy was being used by Stalin, Lenin famously said, "Do not let that fucker get in power." Let's get into the specifics. According to Orwell, who was a democratic socialist, by the way, according to Orwell, Animal Farm does reflect the events leading up to the Russian Revolution of 1917 and then into the Stalinist era of the Soviet Union, a period where Russia lived under the Marxist-Leninist ideology of Joseph Stalin. Again, not exactly what communism is in its own right, much like how there are many breeds of capitalism. Capitalism in the United States looks different than the state-led capitalism of China. There are various ways that communism can manifest too. Anyway, Orwell, who himself was a democratic socialist, and yet, you know, Steven Crowder's like, no, he's anti-socialist, was a critic of Stalin and was hostile to the Moscow-directed Stalinism, an attitude that was critically shaped by his experiences during the Barcelona May Days conflict between the POUM and the Stalinist forces during the Spanish Civil War. In a letter to Yvonne de Vet, Orwell described Animal Farm as a satirical tale against Stalin, and in his essay Why I Write, he said Animal Farm was the first book where I tried with full consciousness of what I was doing to fuse political purpose and artistic purpose into one whole. As for one of the reasons why a lot of this ends up being such a problem for us, a lot of people misunderstand Animal Farm, and if we look at the reception section for it here, we can actually see one of the reasons why. So contemporary reviews of the work were not actually universally positive when it came out. Writing in the American New Republic magazine, George Soule expressed his disappointment in the book, saying that it puzzled and saddened him. It seemed on the whole dull. The allegory turned out to be a creaking machine for saying in a clumsy way things that would have been better said directly. Also noting that the failure of the book commercially in its original run arises from the fact that the satire deals not with something the author has experienced, but rather with the stereotyped ideas about a country which he probably does not know very well. Regardless of how well the book is venerated today, in its time, there were several critics of the book basically saying, hey, we know what you're trying to say, but this is kind of clumsy, and this has actually led to a lot of people misinterpreting a lot of George Orwell's works later on. I mean, let's face it, how many times have you heard some person yell out, "This is literally 1984," with zero context?
Okay, so let's go back to then. Animal Farm, original from Orwell. It was basically an allegory for the Russian Revolution. The old major was Karl Marx, Snowball was Trotsky, Napoleon was Stalin. And basically, it's a story in which the animals take over the farm only for that revolution to give way to complete totalitarianism.
Well, you're almost right there. You see, Major is broadly based on Karl Marx, but he's based on Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, which is to say, Major in the adaptations of George Orwell's Animal Farm is based off of the ideology of Marxist-Leninism. The purpose of Marxist-Leninism is to try to turn a capitalist state into a socialist state by having a revolution of the proletariat that overthrows the old government. The new government then creates what's called a dictatorship of the proletariat, and the new government leads the country based on democratic centralism. Democratic centralism is a very authoritarian idea where when the ruling party discusses an idea to come up with an answer, then once an answer is decided, discussion is never allowed again. This means if something like, say, our understanding of science broadens, but the big government has already said what is going to happen, then that is just what's going to happen. We don't get to have further discussions at all on any of it. This is because in Marxist-Leninist philosophy, the idea is that a centralized communist party would lead society into glorious socialism, which would then be led into glorious communism, with the idea that socialism would be better than capitalism and communism would be better than socialism. The actual problem that you end up running into with this particular philosophy is that it tends to destroy a lot more than it builds on the way up, and this was one of the major criticisms that Kropotkin gave of, well, specifically Marx when they were contemporaries. In The Conquest of Bread, Kropotkin basically argues that if you use the revolution to change who's in charge of the state, you still end up running into the major problem of the state being controlled by people who are very militaristic and do not actually have the best interests of the people in mind or don't have the expertise to take care of them. So after a handful of years, you get what happened after the French Revolution, where you killed a bunch of the oligarchs and then suddenly new oligarchs came in and took over in the power vacuum when you weren't able to take care of things. The reason this book's called The Conquest of Bread is that in Kropotkin's eyes, instead of a revolution taking everything over and changing how the state functions, you instead need to have a society built on mutual cooperation that is divorced from a state. The Conquest of Bread is about having this happen irrespective of capitalism or a state. Kropotkin specifically mentions in the book that having the state centralize industry will end up creating the authoritarian version of socialism that he was highly highly critical of. And of course, this is the version of socialism/communism, Marxist-Leninism that the USSR ended up having. This is why it's important to make a distinction between these political philosophies, what they are in broad strokes and what they manifest as when we get into specifics. Now, Crowder's not going to do any of that. Instead, he's going to try to talk only ever in the broadest of strokes and maybe get into specifics when it benefits him. So like, Old Major was definitely Marx. Well, yeah, that's specific, but it's not 100% true. It's Marxist-Leninism. The book is primarily a critique on Stalin and how the USSR was formed, not a critique on an entire political philosophy.
And I know you're going to have some people out there who either went to college or since they're grasping at straws for some relevant example of socialism working, and they'll say, well, Orwell, Catalonia, and anarcho-syndicalism. Shut up.
Okay, yeah, so people who are smarter than me will use words I don't understand, so I want them to be quiet. Thanks, Crowder. Very enlightening.
Dealt with it before.
We've dealt with it before. It's ridiculous. It just broke down into warring factions, and it lasted about 2.5 years, okay? And this is shorthand. Let's go to now.
Okay, so I guess what he's trying to say here is that people ended up trying to kill each other because of Marxist-Leninism, and we agree. We agree that Marxist-Leninism, the way that it's been used, has been fucking awful. That's not the same thing as strict communism. That's not the same thing as socialism. That's not the same thing as anarcho-socialism. That's not the same thing as syndicalism. All of these words have different meanings, and there are several political philosophers like Kropotkin who were critical of exactly what you're critical of, but, you'd call them filthy commies too, despite them having completely different political philosophies.
And this is what's funny when people get mad about cultural appropriation. Do we have a problem with taking a famous piece of writing, taking its original intent, and using it to convey the exact opposite?
No, we don't actually. I like Has-Been Hotel, and Has-Been Hotel is 100% using the writings of the Bible and twisting them to make a different story. I don't see a problem with that. Fiction is fiction, and we can view different varieties of fictions in vacuums.
How is that not a problem? How is that not a slap in the face?
Because it doesn't harm anybody. Next.
To the legacy of Orwell.
Yeah, how do you not feel like you're disrespecting him?
Right.
It's the same man who writes 1984, which is about doing exactly this.
Yes, exactly this.
Are you referring to Newspeak and 1984 changing the truth in people's minds, or like? Are you going to get into specifics about that, or?
Very good point.
And then they put on they call it a cautionary tale.
Yes.
By the way, we'll see the trailer later, but you'll notice a cautionary tale.
Yeah, cautionary tale. Well, okay, originally it was a cautionary tale against this idea of communist socialist revolution that
No, it was against the idea of how the USSR was built, which is not the same thing, though very tangentially related to communist or socialist revolution. It's, it's one of those things where, like, the devil is in the details, and we've already gone over the details.
Almost always, it leads to worse.
That you'll have a revolution based on that communist or socialistic ideas, and it just kind of veils it for being.
And then you'll end up creating a worse monster than you were fighting. So the movie now is actually, instead of a critique of socialism and big overreaching government,
which, by the way, was only halfway what the original book was about. Again, the original book was about Marxist-Leninism, which had this idea of centralized authority within the government. If we want to go full death of the author, but still try to keep to the original intent, I feel like talking about oligarchy is very, very similar. And oligarchy is not too dissimilar to our current political system that is democratic. It's a democratic republic on the front, but is definitely governed by a few in the background who are lobbying and lining the pockets of the politicians that run our democracy. Having a remake of Animal Farm that goes into that side of corruption instead of the side that we saw from the USSR sounds interesting to me. I don't know. Steven Crowder seems like a boring person who wants the same stories read to him forever and never wants any variation on them. That's what my take is. I think he's boring.
About capitalism and businesses.
Oh.
So remember you had the general was Marx, and we just talked about how Snowball was Trotsky and Stalin. Well, now the big villain is Elon Musk's mom. And it's so on the nose that they basically have Cybertruck Lamborghinis.
Wow.
Oh, cool.
And in case you were not fully clear or convinced, Andy Serkis, a guy famous for playing, someone who lives in a cave, he said that this film was specifically adapted for modern audiences and that they found a way to wedge politics in there.
I mean, in the original version of Animal Farm, Mr. Jones was actually a representative of Tsar Nicholas II. He was born into a wealthy family and was highly educated for the jobs that he would perform, but he was considered ill-prepared for the demands of ruling a vast empire. As a constitutional monarch, he resisted political reform and retained autocratic control, despite the establishment of the Duma, which is a Russian assembly that is supposed to provide legislative functions against an authoritative shit. Like, it's the same thing as our splitting of powers in the United States in theory. His reign saw significant industrial growth and diplomatic engagement, including the Hague Conventions and the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907, but it was also marked by domestic unrest, military defeats, and widespread criticism. So, if we're gonna talk about Animal Farm, and we're going to talk about who the characters are, then we have to talk about Mr. Jones, and the fact that Mr. Jones was a representative of the rich autocracy that was already there to begin with. There's already more players in this game than what Steven Crowder is trying to convince you of.
It's not to be outdone. An Indian production company is remaking the Grapes of Wrath. Here's a finale. Anybody who's read Grapes of Wrath, you know how it ends. Comment below. Like, I was shocked.
I didn't.
So I'm already a little surprised that Steven Crowder actually read, but like, why do I care about this part here? Like, this is a video about something else entirely. And we're just like, yeah, let's just throw the Indian racism in because that's super cool right now. Like, have you, just out of curiosity, in the comment section, have any of you noticed that, like, right now, the targets that you are able to throw shade at without any problems whatsoever in the United States are Indians? Like, racism against Indians is just considered cool right now. Somalis, anybody who's Somali is just considered a prime target at the moment. Trans people, obviously, they've been a target for the last couple of years. And then any immigrant that can be considered useless in some form or fashion, which, Somali people, a lot of them are refugees. They kind of get lumped into that as well. So, yeah, right now, like, Indians are made fun of, Somalis are made fun of, trans people are made fun of, and immigrants on the whole. And those are just, like, the good targets for the right. Have any of you noticed that? I don't know. Are there any that I missed? Let me know in the comment section below. But that feels like the current vibe right now.
Angel Studios distributing leftist propaganda like Animal Farm.
I don't know. The movie seems fine so far. Like, have you seen Chicken Run? It just seems like the same shit so far. It seems like Crowder's making a mountain out of a molehill. Like, originally, I was coming in this with let's talk about what the original political philosophies were of the people involved. But, like, now that I'm just kind of watching the trailer so far, I don't think I care.
Whatever goes upon two legs is an idiot. No animal shall wear clothes. And all animals are equal. Animals running a farm? I have to see it for myself. Ridiculous. I'd rather gouge them out. I want that farm. Which moved to the farmhouse. So the humans know we're in charge.
Okay, you know what? Actually, I know what's going on here. Now that I'm looking at the trailer, I get it. Actually. So there's a couple kinds of remakes that happen with movies, right? Or with books or with anything. There's a couple types of remakes that happens. There's the kind of remake that is based on trying to redo the entire, like, original picture in as best you can. And then there's the contemporary remake, the one that reimagines the original but taking place in the modern day. That's what this is. That's what Crowder is so upset about. Like, looking at this trailer, he's mad that it's a contemporary remake that is looking at the current people who are usurping power in the nation, oligarchs, major business owners, people in the tech industry who've been enriching themselves that he is an apologist for. It's critiquing them because it's a modern remake, and yet Crowder, he is so illiterate. He plays so much Yu-Gi-Oh! His reading comprehension is so bad. He has no way of figuring that out. I think I've got it. I understand the plot now. Okay, and then there's obviously the lean into the rainbow capitalism bit there. Like, that's what that joke is. For those of you who don't know, rainbow capitalism is the idea when a company decides that they should lean into the optics of something as hard as they can. Usually it's like putting up a gay flag in the middle of Pride Month, or saying, like, we support trans rights. We're going to do a Gillette commercial about like how bad it is to be toxically masculine. Like, that's what rainbow capitalism is. It is a company trying to say that their morals are good by appealing to whichever people are supposed to be uplifted in society at the time. It is a very, very standard thing that leftists have been criticizing people who are in big industry for a long time for. It's a marketing gimmick, and while it's a good thing in the sense that rainbow capitalism only happens when the tides are shifting in the favor of the oppressed, it's still something that a lot of people get a very nasty taste in their mouth about, because it's all obviously skin deep. It's just to make money. The big bad CEO telling the pigs, humans and pigs working together, I love the optics. Yeah, that's what that is. That's exactly what that is. I don't know what to tell you, Steven. This seems pretty fucking bog standard. Why are we upset about this?
Oh, it's corporations that you need to fear.
You're wearing clothes.
Oligarchy.
It's not government censorship and totalitarian.
Yeah, because it's a contemporary remake, you dungle.
Some are more equal than others. This is our home.
Here's the thing. I also understand the concern of big tech oligarchs. I get that. I'm talking about
No, you don't. They fund you. What the fuck are you talking about?
AI and people like Peter Thiel, and I think that Elon Musk has some pretty troubling views. There's an easy solve to that. No one's too big to fail, and no one gets favoritism. There's no preferred treatment for any corporation.
So the problem is that's not how the real world works. Do you know how many billions of dollars in government subsidies Tesla has gotten? Again, like I mentioned earlier in the video, the big major thing with corporations in America is that they will privatize their wins. They will take every single bit of money that they earn, and they will stalk it like a fucking dragon. And then when they have losses, when they cannot pay their employees, when they have layoffs, they socialize those losses. They get government subsidies for those losses. They get tax breaks for those losses. When you try to say that, oh, well, none of these businesses are given any preferential treatment, yes, they are. The more money you get, the more money you make, the more preferential treatment the government gives you. That's been the case for years, and to argue otherwise is to be completely blind to what's been going on with our own fucking industry. There is a reason people are so vehemently against lobbying in this country, despite the fact that lobbying is an important way that minority groups can get governments to actually hear their side of a story before voting on a bill. I know. Ask me how I know. Ask me how I know about what lobbying is when I've gone to my own fucking Capitol and lobbied. If you don't believe me, I'll be providing a link in the description from Cato right now that actually goes into how we have basically subsidized big businesses. And for everybody that gets really angry about fucking welfare queens and utilizing government resources and preferential treatment, it's actually big businesses that use the majority of these funds, that get the majority of these funds. The term is literally called corporate welfare, and we spent over $180 billion in corporate welfare. But don't worry, Steven Crowder, don't worry. It's definitely no preferential treatment towards any of these corporations. None of it whatsoever. It doesn't happen. It's not real.
Here's how you know that centralized government is more dangerous than a true free enterprise system.
So you and I, and actually you and Orwell technically agree there that the problem was full centralization of the government. And like even Kropotkin agrees with you, but okay.
There are no grooming gangs that are protected because, for example, Ford or GM decides that they want to keep it quiet.
What grooming gangs are we talking about right now? Is that just what you want to provide context there right now? That'd be cool.
You become a helpless victim when the government determines that you are going to be a helpless victim. They have the authority to do that.
Our government already does that, my guy. That already happens under capitalism. Like, you're concerned about that happening, but we already do that with ICE, like, right now.
Private businesses don't to the same.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. 100%. 100%. Corporations have immense power to silence things with money. They've been doing it for years. Jesus fucking Christ. I'm going to have another source in the description below. This one is mostly an opinion piece about how hush money is utilized in the United States and various other countries, but it basically goes into the fact that any payment that is made to ensure the silence of individuals who possess potentially damaging information is hush money, and this is something that corporate elites have been using for years in order to make sure that they can maintain their positions of power. But, you know, Steven Crowder, as somebody who makes millions of dollars, definitely does not want to have conversations about corporate hush money. Don't worry, when the government does it, you're shit out of luck, but when a corporation does it, you suddenly have human rights. When we can petition a government to do things. We can get people from within a government to operate as servants of the government, but we can't do that from behind the iron curtain of a corporation. Crowder wants to sell you this idea that if you privatize everything and put it through corporations, it will suddenly be more ethical, which could not be further from the fucking truth.
Same degree. And I get it. The big tech sort of tripopoly, definitely, they're more powerful than governments in the past, sure. But when you talk about Epstein, that's not a byproduct of private enterprise.
He's not? Hold on. So the experienced and successful financier, businessman, entrepreneur who built several highly profitable companies does not private enterprise. The guy who had billionaire donors from private enterprise, that did not come from private enterprise and hush money. What the fuck are you talking about? Having the amount of money to individually, privately engage in spending hush money to keep yourself safe as you're abusing children is 100% the product of a system that allows capital to be hoarded like a dragon's wealth under a single individual or a single enterprise. Crowder wants to pretend that that is not a product of capitalism, but every single system can have corruption, and if we are going to talk about products of corruption in the USSR and how that was criticized by Orwell, then we should be able to talk about the same kind of corruption being present in capitalism. And Epstein is 100% a product of capital. All the money he was able to spend for blackmail, all the money he was able to spend for hush money, all the money he was able to spend on his private businesses and interests and his island, all of that came because his money went effectively unchecked, which is what you would expect in a system of capitalism. But Crowder cannot tell you that because his donors would drop him. He would be dropped out of all of his business dealings if he were to do that. So what's the TLDR from this video? Well, it seems to be that Steven Crowder wants to convince you that Seth Rogen's contemporary version of Animal Farm is leftist propaganda because it's covering a contemporary version of events. It is, instead of looking at the rise of the USSR, a specific system that Orwell was criticizing, it is instead looking at the rise of corporate oligarchy, a specific system that Seth Rogen is apparently going to be critiquing. I'm sorry, Steven, that you can't understand that Epstein is a product of capitalism and that communism was not the main thing that Orwell was arguing against in his book, but your love of Yu-Gi-Oh! And therefore lack of reading comprehension, neither of these are my problem. They are a problem for you to solve on your own personal journey. As for y'all in the chat, I want to know what y'all think. I've given my thoughts here as plainly as I can. I don't think Steven understands media. If he does understand media, then he's definitely paid millions of dollars to deliberately misunderstand it and then sell that misunderstanding to you. So maybe subscribe to somebody who's not paid millions of dollars to do that and instead just gives his opinion on the internet. I don't know. Let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. Maybe consider supporting the channel over on Patreon. Maybe consider picking up the channel playmat. Who knows? There's all kinds of things you could do that would be awesome. That said, thank you for watching, and as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, you made it to the end. I want to give an extra thanks to the patrons who allow me to do this full time. I want to thank Aaron Rail, Astral, Britzkrieg, Jemshin, Poundini, Red Joker, Victoria, Jonas, Craig, Tarika, Fireshard, Smiling GM, John, Dren Hadamada, Creeper, Sagittarius, you know I'm not saying that last part, Valis of Sereth, Ottoman Angel, Rooster Rachel, and Fire Panda, who are all my $20 and up patrons.